Howdy and welcome to the MrMaple Show. I'm Tim, and today we're going to teach you how to graft Japanese maples. Guys, smash that like button, we'd really appreciate it. We're going to start off with talking about advanced planning, blades of glory, and the care, the aftercare that's so important, the ABCs of grafting Japanese maples. I'm here with Jules, who's one of our interns for this summer. We hope that when she graduates with her environmental horticulture degree, she comes back to us here at MrMaple. So Jules, what's been your most fun thing you've been doing here at MrMaple?
I mean, getting to see all the plants is like really amazing. I didn't know that many kinds of Japanese maples existed before coming here. So yeah, I mean, just getting to walk through the greenhouses every day and just kind of like having my mind blown like every day, seeing something new.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things about Japanese maples, is seeing how they grow and being able to see all the different varieties here at MrMaple. Well, today we're going to continue on with what you've been doing. She's been part of our horticulture team here that has been cutting scions, getting things ready that ships out to our Buckholz farm. And today we're going to continue that process with the grafting process. And that's what's kind of fun here. I mean, getting to see how you can actually make these new varieties of Japanese maples through this clone type thing of grafting. What interests you about grafting?
Just like you said, I mean, getting to make the new species and like, it's like kind of building a stronger plant almost with grafting, I feel like, which is pretty amazing. And it's just, yeah, I mean, the science behind it is so cool.
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about it. The reasons why we graft Japanese maples is they don't come true from seed. Japanese maples don't do well in the landscape when done from rooted cuttings. They make a great container plant or a bonsai plant. But there's a lot when it comes to Japanese maples that people don't realize. When we graft a Japanese maple, what we're doing is we're adding vigor to the plant. And so we're improving, like you were talking about, we're actually improving the tree by adding vigor behind it and putting it on a root system that helps it make it more disease resistant to Pseudomonas and Verticillium wilt. And that's the big bonus about having seedlings. Seedlings are what we graft to as our rootstock. And by having a seedling, we're essentially creating a unique root system that's going to be more diverse and less likely to get attacked by disease than if they were all rooted cuttings that we were grafting to. So a lot of fun things. Let's jump into it. We're going to talk about our tools of the trade. We've got a lot of things going on here. I mentioned the rootstock earlier. This is a green palmatum, small leaf palmatum, as you can see. This is kind of like what you'd find growing in the wild as Acer palmatum, subspecies palmatum. In Japan they call it momiji. And this makes a perfect rootstock. If you use a little bit larger leafed Japanese maple, it can actually cause some more reversions on some of the variegated types. So I do recommend the smaller leafed Acer palmatum, subspecies palmatum. And this would be a tree that would grow into a large tree if you plant it out in the landscape. But then again, all we're trying to do here is use the root system of this tree. That's what's called the rootstock. And then what we have is the scion. This is the cultivar that we're trying to graft. And today, it's Acer shirasanum mikado, selection by Talon Buckholz. And this is what we're going to be grafting onto this rootstock to create more Acer shirasanum mikado. Now, sometimes this is called the cutting, the scion. This is the rootstock or understock. It's what's underneath your graft. Next up, we've got rubbing alcohol. You always got to be clean when you're going through this process. We've got some bags. We'll talk about a little bit more about what that's for later. Sandwich bags. That's really not for the nursery setting, but it's more for the home gardener who's trying to graft. We got some concave pruners over here. Labels, because it's important to label everything at the point of graft. We've got buddy tape, B-U-D-D-Y tape, some grafting rubber bands, and one of our most important things we've got here are our grafting knives. It's important to have sharp knives, and we've used these things. We've put thousands and thousands and thousands of grafts behind these grafting knives right here. So it comes with Japanese maples. It's a fun thing to learn, and a lot of things go into it. The thing that a lot of people forget, they see all this and they want to jump right into grafting. And there's a lot of pre-care that goes into your advanced planting to make sure that your grafts are successful. So with the advanced planting, one of the most important things is making sure you have a healthy understock. And with this tree, you just want to make sure that it gets fertilized and treated well, not forgotten, put it at the back of the nursery. You're going to make sure that it's put somewhere where you can actually take care of it and make sure it's nice and healthy for grafting. Now, during this process, when you know it's getting close to the time frame you're going to be summer grafting, you're going to want to let this tree dry out. You're going to want to let this tree get the roots as dry as possible without killing it, which is a very tough thing to do, because if this tree is waterlogged when you're grafting it, you're not going to get any takes. And that's probably the most critical part of the advanced planting, other than having a healthy root system itself. The next part we're going to get into are the blades of glory. And we always call that because that's the thing that everyone focuses on, but if you don't have the pre-care and the aftercare figured out, it's all going to fail. So you got to have a healthy root system, and you got to have it dried out so you're going to be successful with grafting. The next step is selecting your scions. These were cut just minutes ago, and these are what we're grafting. These are those scions. Now, what we do with these are we trim off those leaves, and we leave these petioles here to the leaves on them. So I'll let you trim those leaves off, and I'll let you trim all these up so that we're ready for grafting with those. Okay. Now, while she's doing that, I like to prepare my rootstocks. And sometimes I'll do this even earlier than when I'm grafting. So I may go through and just cut all my palmatums down to about a foot, because I know most of the time I'm grafting a low graft of an upright like Mikado, I'm going to be grafting it fairly low. And so I'll just go through here and trim off all my rootstock and get it prepared. And it's good to have a bin around that you can store your extra trash so you can throw that out later. Right now I'm just set those under the table.
How should I cut the tip off?
That's a great question. On summer grafting, we're grafting hard wood. We're grafting wood that has been selected because it's nice and firm. But you get this new growth during the summer that's sometimes soft. And during summer grafting, you actually need to prune that out. And so you just take that soft new growth out, because it's not going to be a successful graft. You really have to have that more firm wood, nice and firm, for the summer scion.
All right. And is it okay if like this has the notch in it?
Yeah, so we're actually repurposing some of our rootstocks that have failed in the past. If you do 20,000 grafts, you may end up getting, 90% if you're really good. You may, if you're having a bad year, you may be humbled and get 20%. Well, even when you get 90% on grafting, that means 10% of them didn't take. Mm-hmm. And so this is a tree that we've actually grafted to before, and this time we're going to turn it into Mikado.
Okay. And are we keeping the petioles to know which way it's facing, or why are we keeping those?
So the reason we're keeping the petioles on the scion is because behind the petiole is actually the bud. And that's actually the bud that has the leaves that are going to come out during the next flush of growth. With summer grafting, it may flush out this year if you graft early in August. If you're grafting later in the season, you really don't want it to flush out again, because if you're grafting in October, cold weather's coming in, and you don't want it to be pushing growth when that cold weather's coming in, or you'll have to really protect your tree until it could possibly go on that dormant side, and it has to develop new buds for the next set of leaves to come out in the spring. So the best thing we can do is protect those buds that have those sets of leaves, and they're right there. Mm-hmm. And so by cutting this off, we're not pulling it off, we're cutting it. It allows these to fall off when the graft takes and the new leaves to emerge. If we pull these off, those buds can get damaged, and while the graft may take, you may actually have the leaves damaged and your graft and your tree die overall. Okay. So now I've cut some rootstocks, and we often leave what we call a sap stump. That's a little bit higher spot that the rootstock can actually release sap from if there is that excess water from watering your Japanese maples. So Jules, we're going to use the knives next. And before we get into this, let's talk a little bit about safety. When you're propagating a Japanese maple, you kind of have to use a knife. And when you're using a knife, you got to watch out, because it's not a matter of whether or not you're going to cut yourself, it's when. Especially if you're doing large numbers of grafting. So it's really important to be safe. The first rule of thumb, we always joke, don't cut your thumb. Whenever you have a knife, you're going to often drop it. Let it fall to the ground. Don't try to grab it. Don't try to grab it with your legs. Don't try to grab it with your hands. That's how you get cut. Secondly, I'm going to show you some processes on how we do these things and how we make all of our cuts. And you're going to want to try to follow those, because there's ways that we teach that help prevent you from cutting yourself when you're propagating and grafting Japanese maples. So it's important to sort of follow these steps. Now, when we're cutting a scion, we're cutting a wedge. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut a lip on this plant and leave that flap on there hanging and slide that wedge in there, let it heal together, and when it heals, it creates the new cultivar. Essentially, all we're doing when we are grafting and propagating Japanese maples is creating a wound, inserting a new branch into that wound, and then making it heal as effectively as we can. And lastly, the most important thing about safety with knives is making sure you've got a sharp knife. And you got to realize we are making surgical cuts on these trees. So if you have me a paper towel, we're going to clean these knives before we start making any cuts. And what we're using here to clean here today is we've got some isopropyl alcohol. I've seen some people use a bleach solution, which works fine as well. We're just trying to make sure that our tools are clean, because making cuts, you want it to heal as quickly as possible. Keeping clean tools definitely helps that. Now, we're going to start off by teaching you how to cut the scion. And that scion is probably the hardest cut to make of everything, because you really need to get a nice clean wedge. What a lot of home gardeners can do is practice these wedges that I'm going to be teaching you on the rootstock tops, because you may not have a lot of scions to waste during this process. These are going to be a little bit harder to make cuts on, because the wood is older and harder wood. If you've got some trimmings that you can practice on, for instance, we've got some bloodgood trimmings we're going to practice on before we start really working on Mikado. You can really get a feel of the best way to cut scions. And whenever you get a lot of grafters in a room, everybody does it differently. I've learned how to cut scions a million different ways. One of the ways that Matt and I prefer is a way where you do it this way. But today we're going to teach you a different way to cut scions. And it typically requires you having to have a table. And if you'll scoot over a little bit this way, I'll show you a little bit about what I mean. I get an edge of a table, and I take the knife, and you can do it two ways. You can take it and work at the base of the knife and use the motion of the knife to cut down, or you can take the top of the knife and slowly cut down that way. And doing so, you can create a wedge. Now you saw that wedge of what you want. Let me show you what you don't want. What you don't want is a spoon. And a spoon curves like that. This is what you don't want. When you have a spoon like that, when you're making a flat cut onto the tree, it creates an air pocket where the tree's cambiums don't actually touch, and so there's no place for it to heal. So you really want to have a nice clean cut. Let's get you over here in this spot and see how you can make some cuts with some of our practice bloodgood cuttings. That's a great point. Sometimes I'll come in here and shorten it up a little bit. And as you can see there, we still have a point, but it's not as long. So now, since you've learned, Jules, how to cut scions, I'm gonna let you cut these into scions. And you're gonna ask, how many nodes, how many different spaces between shall we use for each graft? I mean, because clearly you don't want to graft this and have a foot scion on here. The answer is kind of simple. You can use 1, 2, or even sometimes 3 nodes. 2 is pretty ideal. 1, we may often use 1 node of grafting, which is this one space here, and then you see this set of buds right here. Sometimes we'll cut right above that and use 1 node when we're grafting something that's really rare. For instance, if we're trying to produce red panda, we're going to graft every single node that we have because we can get more out of every stick of scion wood that we have as well. So if you will, you can go ahead and take the trimmers and cut these up into nodes of 2 or 3. Now, sometimes people ask, how long can I keep this wood like this? During the winter, you can keep the scion wood almost a month in a refrigerator. During this time of the year, during the summer grafting, you don't want to keep it more than about a week. The plant deteriorates a lot quicker this time of the year than it does during the winter grafting. And because of that, you need to graft fresh wood if possible. It's always better if you can cut it that day and turn around and graft it.
And should I split this one in half?
You can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's not too small?
Nope.
Okay.
All right. Now, if you will, go ahead and start working on trying to turn each of these into wedges.
Okay. Both sides have to be flat, or is it really just important that one side is flat?
That's a great question, Jules. Whenever you're grafting, it's important to make sure you have at least one flat side that you can put up against the base of the tree to have a successful graft.
Okay.
Typically the flap is a little more movable, and so it's less important that the back side is a perfect cut as it is the front side. And as long as you have one really good cut on a wedge that's nice and flat, you can have a successful graft.
Okay.
So next up, I'm going to teach you how to make the cut on the rootstock. Sometimes it's good to start a little bit higher up and just do a few practice runs, because your graft's going to be a low graft. You're going to want to have your actual graft be nice and low. But sometimes it's good to start up high to learn how to actually do the process. So we cut from right to left. We don't angle it quite a bit. And if you angle it, you'll see people start shaking and pushing, and they're often not using the knife to cut. They're trying to use their muscles and push through the tree. And they'll actually end up cutting through, and if their hand's behind it, they'll cut through the tree and cut their hand on the other side. So that's probably one of the easiest ways you can get hurt when grafting. But if you notice, we're not cutting very deep at all. I mean, we are, let me grab one that's a little bit lower. Well, that's fine. If you notice here, we're not cutting very deep at all. We're actually, most of the tree we're not even cutting through. It's going to heal quicker when we do that. And the thinner cut you make, the more cambium you have exposed. And that cambium is the next step in the grafting process. And if you do that properly, you can actually pick one side, set that scion in, and you've got something that you can finish tying off, and it'll heal together. So let's have you start up high and try making a few flat cuts. So now, since we've got our scion cut into a wedge and we've got our flap cut here on the rootstock, we're going to slide this Mikado scion right inside. And what we want to do is line up one edge. And sometimes Matt will even take his fingernail and line it up on the edge. I like to start over, slide it where you see a little bit of space, and then slide it until I realize that it's lined up. Because you just want it barely lined up. If it's not lined up, it will never take. And you can adjust it as you're moving the rubber band. And I often tie up, and Matt and I like to tie back down, just so you don't have a simple tool pulling this part back against the tree. And then we tie it off.
Okay.
So I will let you try that, and I'll go through the process with you over here on this side. Now, because this has been grafted, we've still got a lot of stuff to do next, but we're gonna go ahead and throw a label on there on each of these so we know what this tree is. It doesn't get mislabeled later. And again, these are Acer Shirasalmon Mikado. It's just a really cool Acer Shirasalmon by Talon Buchholz in the Floral Wonder collection out of Buchholz Nursery. And we'll keep those nice and low, those labels. And during summer grafts, I like to keep a little bit of a sap stump up here. It's not necessarily necessary, but it does, like you'll see here, we cut this off so the graft would sit a little bit easier. It does allow for that excess moisture to come out when you are watering these plants. At this stage, this is actually the stage now at Buchholz Nursery where we would take them and put them into a big tent. And at that stage, is pretty much keeping high humidity in there, trying to keep these things just lightly hand watering them every once in a while, watering them just enough to survive and keep that humidity really high in those tents so that this graft will heal. But with humidity comes fungus, so you have to watch out for fungus. Sometimes you spray Zerotol in there to keep down the fungus in these grafting tents. For the home gardener, we've got a unique way of having your own greenhouse that we learned from Bill Shell down in Alabama. And Bill Shell's taught a lot of people how to graft. He's a good friend of ours. We met him in the Maple Society. These are sandwich bags, just regular sandwich bags. We often make a slight cut on one side, just a little bit of cut on one side, sometimes up about, a third of the bag. And then what I'll do here is I'll slide that cut down to the graft spot. And with a Ziploc bag, you can actually zip it back up, which is neat. But a rubber band will do the same thing, where you can tie it off with rubber band or a bread twist tie. So you can actually take this, tie this off with a rubber band, and then at that point, it's a waiting game for these petioles to fall off and new leaves to emerge. And again, you want to keep this on the drier side during that process. You want to make sure that, and it's not heavy rains, you want to put it somewhere where it's just not always getting rained on and you can hand water, you can control the water. But once you see some leaves on there, I come in here, make a cut on the bag, start letting it used to the humidity outside of the tent. Next day I come over here and cut another bag on this side. And then I'll end up taking the whole bag off. I'm trying to wean it off of being in that humidity tent. The very best time to take it out of the humidity tent is on a cloudy day. Cloudy days are some of the easiest on these fresh grafts. And again, if you're grafting this in the summer, early August, it's easy to let this tree leaf out. It'll form new buds before it drops its leaves in the fall. Very typical for that. If you're doing this in October, you're going to do your best to keep this tree dormant. So you're going to want to try to encourage this plant to stay on that dormant side once you've grafted it until the following spring. So it's a lot of different things to take into effect, but that is the care of these trees, and the humidity is one of the most important aspects. I appreciate y'all jumping in today's video. I hope y'all learned something during this process as to see what we go through each and every day to get Japanese maples created to get to your door. And for those people who are out there trying to learn how to graft, we've got a bunch of videos on how to graft Japanese maples, even a podcast. You should go check those out. Between all these different videos, you'll catch different tips here and there on how to graft Japanese maples successfully. Take care, God bless, and have a great day.